So today I want to continue the devotionals I've been doing on Hebrews 12, 1 through 3, kind of finish up here. We've been looking at this the last couple of weeks, and we've been looking at this verse, and we've been really focusing on the word perseverance. So the idea here that the author of Hebrews is giving us is that the Christian life is like running a race. That's his metaphor, and he's been using that metaphor to great effect. And so we're running a race, a distance race, and he's urging us to hang in there, to persevere, to remain even under difficult circumstances, to finish this thing, to not give up. And so we've seen the last couple of weeks a couple of motivations. He talks about this great cloud of witnesses that's a reference back to Hebrews 11, the great hall of fame of faith that he's just gotten done telling the stories. And the image is like they're the fans in the stands who are cheering us on as we run our race for Jesus. But at the same time, their lives are also testimony to us because they've run their race and they've finished and it can be done. And so they're cheering us on and they're rooting for us, but they're also saying, run your race because I've run my race. You can do it. So that was the first week. And then we went to Hebrews 12, verse 2, and we saw that another motivation for persevering is to fix our eyes on Jesus. And so the running coach advice that you're going to run where you're looking, and so we want to be looking towards Jesus. We want to fix our eyes on him and run towards him. And we saw he's described as the pioneer of faith, and so that means Jesus is the ultimate witness. He's already run his race. He's endured the cross. And so he's the ultimate example to us, but also he's the perfecter of our faith. And in what Jesus did at the cross, we said he actually ran our race for us. And so one of our motivations to hang in there, to keep going, is that Jesus has already done everything that needs to be done. He's taken on our greatest enemies, sin and death, and he's won the victory. And so in his victory, we are assured of our own victory. And so now I want to kind of finish up our look at these great verses by looking at two phrases that I haven't really talked about yet. The first is this one, back in verse 1. We should throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And then again in verse 2, we didn't really talk about this incredibly important phrase that Jesus, for the joy set before him, that's how he ran his race. And so let's talk first of all, back to verse 1, about throwing off the sin that so easily entangles. So if you're going to run, the image here is that you can't get your feet tangled up. It's like running with your shoelaces untied. It's not going to go. Eventually, you're going to trip yourself up. And so to run the race well, we need to get rid of sin. And I love that image of entangle when we talk about sin, because sin has that way of kind of insinuating itself into your life and sort of wrapping itself around you, pulling you down into places you didn't intend to go. So things like lust or our anger, our envy, our self-centeredness, those sorts of things tend to take us to places we didn't intend to go. They trip us up. And if you're going to run, you don't want to run with your shoelaces untied. You don't want to run with things that are going to tangle your feet up. So there's motivation here not to let sin enter into our lives, but more than that, we should also throw off everything that hinders. And I think that's an interesting phrase. And more than just sin, more than just the things that we know are wrong, that the things that the Bible says, don't do that, there are commandments against that. Everything that hinders is not necessarily a sin, but things that aren't helpful in running the race and following Jesus. And so those things, we should shed those things. It's like, going out and trying to run with an overcoat on. You could do it, but you wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't want to go very far, especially if it's a warm day. It's extra weight. It's a burden. When we think about how to live the Christian life, and as we think about the choices we make every day, there's a temptation to ask at the most basic level, well, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with it? So if that activity is obviously sinful, if it's stealing from a bank, or if it's calling someone a bad name, well, obviously I wouldn't want to do that. That's a sin that entangles. But just asking what's wrong with it maybe isn't asking enough. Maybe the question we should be asking is, does it help me run for Jesus? Because there are things that they're not necessarily sinful, they're not necessarily a biblical prescription against them, but there are things which aren't helpful in following after Jesus. There are things that can be distracting. They're not necessarily evil, but if it doesn't help, if it's hindering me in my race of following Jesus, then maybe it's not necessary in my life. One of the things we've talked about as a staff is we kind of are easing back into life after COVID-19. And for a lot of us, we've had this enforced period of shutdown, and now things are going to be available again. And we've talked about it like a buffet. And what are you going to put on your plate? And there are all these things that you can put on your plate, things that have previously been on your plate that have been maybe removed for a period of time. And now the question is going to be, is that something I'm going to put back on my plate? Am I going to take a little scoop of this thing over there? And they might not be bad things. But the question to ask as we start building our plates back up is it going to help me follow Jesus? Is it going to help me run my race? And if not, if it's something that's going to be hindering, maybe I've learned in the last 2 months I don't need it as much as I thought I did. So that's the first encouragement here, to persevere, to run our race, to get rid of the sin that entangles, get rid of the things that hinder. And then the last thing I really want to spend some time on is this idea of for the joy set before him. We're back to talking about Jesus. We're back to talking about what Jesus did on the cross. Jesus ran his race. Jesus ran a marathon. His marathon lasted 33 years here on earth. And the final couple of miles, Jesus endured incredible hardship. The last couple of 100 yards that Jesus ran, he had nails in his wrists, and he had a crown of thorns on his head. He had a spear in his side, and he kept running. He endured. He endured the shame. He endured the opposition of sinners, and he finished his race. And you say, well, how did he do that? Why did he do that? And the answer here is for joy. Jesus ran for joy because of the joy that was set before him, because Jesus saw to the other side of the cross. Jesus saw the souls of those who would be redeemed because of the race that he ran. He saw the obedience to the Father and the joy and pleasure it would bring to his Father and the glory it would bring to his Father's name if he finished his race. And so for the joy he saw on the other side, the joy of the finish line, if you will, that's what motivated Jesus to run. In the same way, keeping that metaphor going for us is when you say, well, why should we persevere? Why should we hang in there? And the same answer, for the joy that's set before us. For what we see on the other side of the reward, you will, of finishing the race. When I go out and I run, I often tell myself that the reward for continuing to run is that when I get to the finish, I get to stop. Right? So that's my motivation, is that I run faster so I can quit sooner. But more than that, there's that realization that if I run, I'm going to be in shape. If I run, I can lose weight. If I run, I feel better for the rest of the day, those endorphins that kind of course through my body. And the metaphor that's going here in these verses includes that idea of running competitively, of finishing your race so that you can join your place in the stands with all those other witnesses. That's part of the reward, the joy of running well. But there's more to it than that, of course. It's the joy of serving Jesus well. It's the joy of sacrificing yourself for the good of others to help them to see the glory of Jesus in their lives. It's all of that joy. At the end, the finish line of recognizing that in the end it will be worth it. And so we're encouraged to run for joy, to run for the joy that we believe with all our hearts lies on the other side. Beginning of Hebrews chapter 11, we're given a definition of faith. It says, faith is confidence in what we hope for. It's assurance about what we do not see. Older versions say faith is the evidence of the unseen. And so it's faith. It's our hope for what lies on the other side of the finish line. It's our belief that there's joy ahead that gives us the strength to run today. Faith is borrowing on the blessings of the future so that we have the strength to endure today. And so I want to encourage you to persevere for Jesus, to keep running the race. Throw off everything that entangles, throw off everything that hinders, and focus on the joy at the end of the finish line. And run your race well for Him.